Hello, my name is Tom Furr. I've been with the Idaho Transportation Department 18 years now. I work in design traffic services at headquarters. Today we will be focusing on ADA compliant curb ramps.
Hello, and my name is Blaine Schwindeman, and I've worked with ITD for over 34 years, and in that time frame, done many different jobs with ITD. Currently, I work in a design construct section, doing construction, designing projects. For the last 12 years, though, I have also been the subject matter expert for ADA ramps in the District 3 office.
Our objectives today are to provide ADA curb ramp history, provide you with vocabulary of the ADA curb ramps, inform you of the requirements of those ADA curb ramps, and our inspection procedures. At the end of this training, you will be able to identify laws that require accessible sidewalks, understand ADA vocabulary and ADA terms, know ADA curb ramp design requirements and the limits, and understand the ITD inspection and reporting requirements. Why do we provide curb ramps? First thing that comes to mind might be for those that are in wheelchairs, but it's also for other compromised pedestrians. Maybe someone who's on crutches or walks with a cane, perhaps even some of you that have had sports injuries. The curb ramp provides a method to get from the sidewalk to the crosswalk in the street. Blind pedestrians tend to prefer curbs that they can feel. For those people, we provide detectable warning surfaces. So it started out in 1968 with the Architectural Barriers Act that required buildings and on-site facilities that were designed, constructed, altered, or leased with federal funds to comply with the accessible design standards. ADA or ABA guidelines were updated and combined in 2004 and further supplemented in 2007. They were adopted by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2010. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibited discrimination in programs and activities funded with federal funds. That means administered by federal recipients. This required curb ramps on federal aid projects. According to CFR 49, Part 27, it's the FHWA that's responsible for the implementation of pedestrian access requirements on public roadways, and that is through their stewardship of highways and roadways. The Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987 clarified the intent of many non-discrimination laws by stating that if an entity receives federal funds in any of its programs and activities, all of the operations of that entity are subject to the requirements of these non-discrimination laws, whether they are federally funded or not. So in short, the Restoration Act extended the reach of Section 504 to the entire operation of federal recipients. The Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA, is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in all aspects of life. The ADA applies to all entities, public and/or private, regardless of funding source. Similar to the ABA, the ADA primarily pertains to buildings. The requirements of ADA closely mirror those of Section 504. The material presented in this training is derived primarily from the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, or PROAG. The PROAG contains 4 chapters. Our focus will be on Chapter R3, specifically Section R301, which pertains to the pedestrian access route. Please note that there is much more detail in the PROAG than we are able to cover in this training. In addition to this training, it is suggested that entities become intimately familiar with Title II of the ADA, the Department of Justice implementation of regulations 28 CFR Part 35, and the PROAG in an effort to plan, design, construct, and maintain accessible facilities. ADA rules and regulations can be confusing. There are many terms and acronyms that you are probably not familiar with. We'll try to help you with those today. The ADA vocabulary includes terms such as pedestrian access route, curb ramp, running slope or grade, cross slope, ramp slope, flare slopes, counter slope, turning space or landing, transition, clear space, and detectable warning surfaces.
Here we see a typical curb ramp. The pedestrian access route, which is shown in the dashed red line, is basically the big picture. It is the route taken by pedestrians. We try to encourage pedestrians to use the pedestrian access route by making it more accommodating than other options, such as the street, where there could be conflicts with vehicles. The pedestrian access route shown here includes the sidewalk, curb ramp, and the crosswalk. Several components of a curb ramp are also identified here. The landing, the curb ramp itself, the flares on each side of the ramp, the detectable warning surface are shown in this picture. Here, the pedestrian access route encompasses all features used to safely provide pedestrian movements. Under section R301.4.2 of the PROAG, allows for pedestrian facilities to follow the roadway grade but cannot exceed it. In other words, if your roadway grade is at a 6% slope or grade, then your sidewalk or pedestrian access route can follow that same grade, but you can't exceed that grade. If your roadway slope or grade is 4%, your sidewalk can't exceed that 4%. Also, where the pedestrian access route is supported by a structure, such as a bridge, the grade should not exceed 5% in new construction. R301.43, basically, you have control over the slope of the bridge when you design and build it, so you should ensure that the pedestrian access route does not exceed 5%. In this slide, we represent the cross slopes of the pedestrian access route. The cross slope of a walkway perpendicular to the pedestrian traffic should not exceed 2% maximum. This includes turning spaces of curb ramps and public-private approaches. We are focused on curb ramps right now, but greater attention will be given to the entire pedestrian route in the future. Here you can see the effects of excessive cross slopes. Curb ramps are a means to eliminate curb issues for physically impaired people. They're used to transverse the change in elevation from the sidewalk down to the street. As shown here by the arrow in this slide, the maximum curb slope that you can build ramps at is 8.3%, or 1 in 12. The turning space, which is the space above the ramp, provides room for those using wheelchairs to change direction and line up to the curb ramps. Cross slopes of turning spaces is to be less than 2% in any direction. Transitions are where the ramp surface meets other surfaces. This is where the grade breaks are located. Severe grade changes in transitions can result in problems for those we are trying to accommodate. Flares are the adjacent sides of the ramp. They allow able-bodied pedestrians to cross the ramp without tripping. And the detectable warning surface is located at the bottom of the ramp at the back of curb and must extend the full width of the ramp. It serves as an aid to those who are visually impaired to let them know they're about to enter the area where vehicle traffic is expected. Curb ramps are not a one-size-fits-all. Ask for help if needed. Really, some locations are simply technically infeasible. Here is a quick review of what we've discussed. First, the pedestrian access route, or the acronym PAR, is the big picture. It defines the path that pedestrians take to move around. Second, the curb ramp, which is a means of traversing elevation changes. Their maximum slope is 12:1, or 8.33% running slope. And the cross slope is 50:1, or 2% maximum. Flare slopes, these reduce any tripping hazard for able-bodied pedestrians. Their maximum slope is a 10:1, or 10%. Counter slopes, which is the slope at the bottom of the ramp coming out of the gutter, that slope at the ramp transition is less than 20:1, or 5%. The running slope, or the grade, less than 20:1, or 5% on structures, or match the roadway grade. Turning spaces, or sometimes referred to as landings, are required to be level or a 50:1, or 2% maximum slope in any direction. They're required to be 48 inches minimum width in each direction, with a 60-inch width preferred. And the detectable warning surface, or truncated domes, they're to be at the bottom 24 inches of the ramp and at the back of the curb, full width of the ramp. There are 4 types of curb ramps. The first one here is a perpendicular ramp. We have a parallel ramp, combination ramp, and a blended transition. The ITD standard drawings provide our specifications for perpendicular, parallel, combination curb. ITD standards are based on parts of PROAG, the proposed right-of-way access guide, but PROAG is not the law. PROAG is proposed and ITD took the best parts of it from it. Our standard drawings are the standard for the state highway system. Cities may have their own standards, but ITD standards apply to state highways. Here we show a perpendicular curb ramp. It's a perpendicular because the curb cut is perpendicular to the pedestrian travel direction. Here we have a parallel where the curb cut and changes in elevation are parallel to the pedestrian direction of travel. This is often called a diagonal curb ramp because of the way it is oriented. It is still a perpendicular curb ramp. Here's another version of a perpendicular curb ramp and another. Perpendicular curb ramps have their pros and their cons. The pros is that it's one ramped surface. It provides a flat pedestrian access route, and it's good on wide or separated sidewalks. The cons is it takes a large area to construct them. They can require a large area of right-of-way. Pedestrian push-button placement is tricky also. The turning space, which is the area at the top of a ramp, is a 4x4 minimum turning space required at the top of the perpendicular curb ramp for wheelchairs to change direction. A 5x5 square turning space is preferred. The turning space must be less than 2% slope in any direction. Here in this slide, we're showing the challenges created for wheelchairs without turning spaces. Can you imagine trying to transverse this kind of situation in a wheelchair? Here in this slide, looks like a turning space was provided, but something's in the way. Here we have a turning space that serves both curb ramps. This is perfectly acceptable. Curb ramps running slope is 12:1 or 8.3% maximum grade. You don't have to chase the slope forever, only a maximum distance of 15 feet. However, there are often other options to construct a compliant curb ramp, as you will see later. Get help if you can't meet requirements or fit it within the right-of-way. Here's a cross-section of a perpendicular curb ramp. Typical curbs are about 6 inches high, so the ramp, running slope or elevation transition, needs to be at least 6 feet long to achieve 8.3% or 12:1 maximum slope. Remember, this is maximum. Do not build to the maximum slopes. Flared sides. Who uses the flared sides? Able-bodied pedestrians. Steeper slopes allowed up to 10:1 or 10% max on flared slopes. They have a 15-foot maximum length. You don't have to chase forever. In a hilly area, the standards may be technically infeasible. Here, in this slide, the flared sides are not needed because the pedestrians are not expected to be walking on the dirt or grass. Here, flared sides were put in, but not really needed. In this slide, we show a good use of flared sides. Here, flare sides should have been used. This is a tripping hazard. Here's another example where flared sides should have been used. Here shows the use of flared sides on one side but not the other. Pedestrians not expected to walk on grass. With the pole there, they probably could have gotten by with a vertical edge on both sides, but this is perfectly acceptable. Here shows a waste of concrete for the flared side. This ramp also appears to have excess cross slope. This could have been addressed by using a vertical curb along the planting area. Another unnecessary flared slope. Here, parallel curb ramp. The parallel curb ramp has the curb cut and change in elevation parallel to the pedestrian direction of. Here we have parallel curb ramps have their pros and their cons. Their pros are the turning space is built in. It takes a smaller footprint, and the bottom of the ramps end at the turning space. The cons are you have to place 2 ramps on the pedestrian access route, and drainage can be an issue. So the turning space on a parallel curb ramp, it's at the bottom of the curb ramp instead of at the top like a perpendicular curb ramp. Requires the same 4x4 minimum turning space, but a 5x5 is preferred. The turning space can include the detectable warning surface or the truncated domes. The ramp slope is 12:1 or 8.3% maximum, just as it is on a perpendicular curb ramp. Once again, there is a 15-foot maximum slope length. You don't have to chase that 8.3% or 12:1 forever. Here is an example of a good parallel curb ramp. In this parallel curb ramp, the discoloration shows buildup of water and silt. Stormwater inlets should be placed upstream of the curb ramps, particularly parallel curb ramps. Drain to the right of the curb ramp would improve this situation. You may not be able to move drains in a retrofit situation, but the ramp needs to be constructed to drain. When a parallel curb ramp is on a radius, the ramp slope needs to be measured at the smallest radius. The entire width of the ramp must not exceed 8.3% maximum slope. Parallel curb cuts slope from 2 directions. Here's another example of a parallel curb ramp. And here's a common curb ramp requirements. Perpendicular and parallel curb ramps share some common characteristics. Both have a common width, Grade breaks are in the same locations. Both require the same cross slopes, have the same counter slopes at the bottom or coming into the gutter, and both have to have the same or require the same clear space. Curb ramps require a minimum of 4-foot width on the ramps. A 5-foot width is preferred. Same for both types, perpendicular and parallel. Grade brakes should be perpendicular to the wheelchair direction as shown on this perpendicular curb ramp. Grade brakes must be perpendicular to the wheelchair direction on parallel curb ramps as well. Grade brakes at both top and bottom of the ramps. In this slide, we're showing it has a good running slope, but the cross slope is not good at a 9.2% at the bottom of the ramp. How could they have done this better? Align with sidewalk. Cross slope, not only does the turning space have to have a 2% maximum cross slope, but the curb ramps and the gutter have the same 2% maximum cross slope requirement. The gutter is often hard to achieve, subject to the natural slope of the roadway. So the same 2% maximum cross slope is also a requirement that applies to parallel curb ramps at the gutter. If the roadway slope is greater than 2%, the pavement should be warped through the curb ramp to flatten the gutter to 2% maximum through the ramp area. The counter slope is the slope of the gutter where it meets the curb ramp. Counter slope is 5% maximum. This makes for a smooth transition while allowing for drainage.
Here we see a curb cut detail from standard drawing 614-3. Note that it states the 5% maximum counter slope.
In this slide, severe changes of counter slope can catch the footrest or cause backward tipping of wheelchairs. Neither situation is pleasant for the wheelchair user. In this slide, we're showing a better example of counter slope. Here it's created a smooth transition from the bottom of the ramp through the gutter onto the pavement. In this slide, the counter slope between the curb ramp and gutter is reasonably done, but there is a problem with the overlay in relation to the gutter. Funding is for building curb ramps, not for milling overlays. This is a well-done curb ramp, but challenges still remain. Small lips used to be allowed at transitions of the curb ramp and gutter to aid in drainage, but are no longer allowed. Here we're showing the clear space at the bottom of the curb ramp. Clear space is the waiting area at the bottom of the ramp. It's a minimum of 4 foot by 4 foot square and is required to be outside of the path of traffic. Here in this slide is showing an example of clear space, but it's in the traffic path. It's not acceptable. And in this slide, we're showing a wider radius takes the clear space out of the traffic's path. Here we'll do a quick review. First, a perpendicular curb ramp. This is a curb cut perpendicular to the direction of pedestrian travel. Parallel curb ramp. Here is these are curb cuts parallel to the direction of pedestrian travel. Ramp width, 48-inch minimum ramp width is required. 60 inches preferred. Grade break, this is the intersection of two or more slopes. Grade breaks must be perpendicular to the direction of travel. Cross slope, this is the slope perpendicular to the direction of travel. This is a 50-to-1 or 2% maximum requirement on sidewalks, ramps, and the gutter. The 50-to-1, 2% maximum cross slope is a requirement in all directions for the turning space. The counter slope, or the gutter, the slope at the ramp transition is required to be less than 20-to-1 or 5%. And the clear space, which is a 48-inch by 48-inch waiting space at the bottom of each ramp, but is outside of the traffic path. The third type of curb ramp we're going to talk about is the combination curb ramp. It's a combination of a perpendicular and a parallel curb ramp. It has features of both types of curb ramps. Sometimes when the elevation difference between the sidewalk and the gutter is too great for either a single perpendicular or a single parallel type ramps, you can do the elevation changes in 2 steps. Here's an example of a combination curb ramp. Here the sidewalk to the turning space is a parallel elevation change followed by a turning space to the gutter, which is a perpendicular elevation change. Okay, in this slide, here we can see the value of a combination ramp in a tight area with a power pole and right-of-way challenges. The elevation change is accomplished in 2 steps. Here's a similar example of a combination curb ramp. This time, the pole is not an obstacle, so flared slopes were used in the radius area. The sidewalk transitions to the turning space as a parallel elevation change, followed by the turning space. Then from the turning space to the gutter is basically a perpendicular elevation change. And here in this slide, we're coming to the last type of curb ramp, which is referred to as a blended transition. These are mostly found in bigger cities with heavier pedestrian traffic with wide crosswalks. The detectable warning surfaces must be placed full width of the curb cut opening. Here's another example of a blended transition which is a bad example for the detectable warning surface installation. The detectable warning surface should be around the entire radius, not just 2 pieces blocked out. In this slide, we'll show a good example of a blended transition. The detectable warning surface products that match the corner radius of the blended transition are available. Here, the detectable warning surface on blended transitions, the radial patterns are available. The detectable warning surfaces are installed as a compromise between the needs of the wheelchair accessibility and the needs of those visually impaired. Curbs indicate a change to the visually impaired. When we take away the curb with the installation of a curb ramp, we need something to cue the visually impaired that they are about to step into traffic. The detectable warning surface provides that visual indication. Detectable warning surfaces come in several different types and materials. Glue down products for retrofits and temporary applications are typically less desirable. Composite materials with anchors set in wet concrete are most common used. Cast iron is very durable, but is the most expensive. The detectable warning surfaces is often called truncated domes because of its it is comprised of a pattern of hemispheric domes with the top cut off. Truncated dome size and spacing is as shown on Idaho Transportation Department's Standard Drawing 614-3, Sheet 4. Where the bottom grade is in front of the back of the curb, the truncated domes or detectable warning surface is to be placed at the back of curb. Here's an example of a perpendicular curb ramp with the truncated domes placement. Likewise, on a parallel curb ramp, where the bottom grade break is in front of the back of the curb, the detectable warning surface is to be placed at the back of curb. Here, in the left example, where the bottom grade break is behind the curb and the distance from either end of the grade break to the back of the curb is 5 feet or less, then the detectable warning surface is to be placed on the ramp within one dome spacing of the bottom of the grade break. On the right example, where the bottom grade break is more than 5 feet from the back of the curb, and the distance from either end of the bottom grade breaks is more than 5 feet from the back of curb, the detectable warning surface is to be placed on the lower landing at the back of the curb. The detectable warning surfaces must have a contrasting color to their surrounding surfaces. In this case, the decorative brick blends with the detectable warning surface. It's not acceptable. Why does contrasting color matter to a blind person? Different levels of blindness. Some can still see color contrast. So maintenance workers will know that it is there. You might ask why there is a curb ramp at this location, possibly due to a bus stop. Detectable warning surfaces must have a contrasting color. Needed on driveways. False cue to pedestrians that they are about to step into traffic. Could cause confusion for the sight impaired, expecting conditions that are not present. However, it is allowed where high traffic volumes are present. In winter conditions, when you have to remove snow from the truncated domes or detectable warning surface, it may be best to use or better to use a brush to clear the snow off. Here again is another brief review. We've identified 4 types of curb ramps: the perpendicular, the parallel, the combination, and the blended transition. Identified unique and shared components of all the ramps: their width requirement, turning space requirement, running slope, cross slope, counter slopes, clear space, and detectable warning surfaces. Here's a list of some inspection tools you may need. The first one is a broom to clear the surface off to get clear measurements, a measuring tape, surveying equipment possibly, a digital level to read out percents of slopes, GPS for exact locations. ITD has a standard inspection form. It's form ITD 0288. It's a curb ramp inspection form. Smart levels are not the only way to measure slopes. If you use them, be sure to calibrate them per the manufacturer's instructions. Below is a link to a video through the Transportation Curriculum Coordination Council, TC3, from the Colorado Department of Transportation. Keep in mind that some of what is identified in this video is applicable to Colorado, and you need to understand Idaho's requirements. You must be connected to the internet to view this video. Here's an example of the ITD's curb ramp inspection form. It's form ITD 0288. What this form does is basically covers the inspection attributes for all the curb ramp types. Basically, it covers your ramp widths, slopes, all that kind of stuff, and identifies whether it's compliant or not compliant. And there is a portion there for non-compliant that you really need to explain any reasoning for why the ramp could not be constructed fully compliant. On the back side, here is the back side of the inspection form, ITD 0288. And this is a diagram basically showing the placement of your smart level to verify the various different attributes of a curb ramp. So where does it go from here? ITD needs to be sure that ADA compliant ramps are all documented. As we mentioned earlier, the FHWA is responsible for seeing that we bring our facilities into compliance. ITD is required to report our progress to FHWA. What we need is for the inspection forms, once they're completed, to be scanned and sent to our website for Americans with Disabilities, which is ada@itd.idaho.gov. Also, it needs to be CC'd to the district project coordinator you are working with in your location. The scanned ITD 288 naming convention for these forms is ITD 0288, the ramp ID number, dash location, dash secondary location. An example of that is ITD 0288-D4-03354-Addison Avenue and Blake Street, NWC, which would be the northwest corner. So one thing to always keep in mind is payment is for ADA compliant curb ramps only. The dimensions and slopes discussed today are either minimums or maximums. Do not build to minimum or maximum. Leave yourself room for error. Non-ADA compliant ramps are to be removed and reconstructed. If you can't build a compliant curb ramp at that location, ask for help. If you have any questions or need help, please feel free to reach out to either us, myself, Blaine, or Tom.